when I agreed to speak this fall, I sort of automatically said, how about a session on Hardy and Hopkins and Hausman, because the three H's always go together in my mouth when I'm teaching. They wrote at the same time, and though they're very different in many ways, they're always taught at the university in the same class. If I had thought about it, I might have held Hopkins out. I have always found him an extremely difficult poet to teach. And he's difficult because he's experimental, he's unusual, he is not easily understood. Next week we'll have an easy poet, in a sense. Hausman speaks for himself. If you've read Hausman before, you know that he writes crystal clear, beautifully crafted poems, lyrics, that are very much the English equivalent of what he, as a Latin specialist, he was a specialist in Latin and Greek literature, as a professor, would be equal to. Hausman believed in boiling down his poetry until anybody could get them, not a word without a place. But he was not an experimentalist. He was not unusual. And with Gerard Manley Hopkins, you get somebody who is, in some lines and in some poems, almost inaccessible to us. A few words about the man first. Hopkins is a man who participated in the 19th century in the renovation of the Catholic Church in England. He started out as a non-Catholic. If you've ever heard of John Cardinal Newman, who was one of the major British Catholics in the 19th century, he's a man who was an Anglican cleric who gradually, as a result of interest in the intellectual movements of the time and in somewhat antiquarian attitudes towards religion in many ways, became an active Catholic, ultimately became a very important man in the Catholic faith. Gerard Manley Hopkins, who was by no means a man of the stature that Newman was, also went through the same mode. He became a Jesuit priest. He only lived 44 years, so he didn't live the life that Newman led, but he became a devout member of the clergy. He, in that sense, withdrew from regular life. The church was wise with Hopkins. They tried several professions, ultimately put him in education where he belonged, and he spent the latter years of his life as a teacher. But his real skill was with words, was with poetry. He ought to have been one of the major poets of the 19th century. But his profession was religion, was to be a priest. And so he wrote his poetry pretty much in private, though his friends knew about it and read and appreciated his work. His poetry was not published until 1918, long after he died, by his friend, the poet Robert Bridges. Hopkins, I think, is especially attractive to the 20th century. He's a man, in a sense, born out of his time. Doesn't sound like anybody from his period, and you'll sense this right off the bat. He's idiosyncratic, in other words, a pre-20th century poet. I've always thought he was especially attractive in two ways. One, Hopkins, of all the poets of his time, is the man most willing to break traditions in terms of poetic structure. He's interested in rhyme, he's interested in sound, he's interested in rhythm. He creates his own way of writing poetry. This is in a century where there already has been a sort of revolutionary attitude. The Romantic Revolution in the early part of the century was led by Wordsworth and Coleridge, already got poetry going again. But by 1880 and 1870, poetry was continuing in certain modes that were insufficient for him. We get somewhat, this sounds like an odd comparison, but it's not so odd, somewhat of an equivalent to Hopkins in America with Emily Dickinson, who was my favorite, who was also a kind of nun in some ways, a private, introspective woman who broke the expectations of poetry readers and poetry critics by her own way of writing poetry. And when her time came, she was found to be just as revolutionary as Hopkins. Though she wasn't quite the crafts person, she wasn't as academic in her attitude towards her art as Hopkins was. Hopkins is a great academic poet in many ways. So here you get this imaginative ability to create new ways of poetry. The great trouble with teaching Hopkins to students at the university is that in many ways Hopkins is an experiential poet. When you take a poem and tear it apart and you look at the words, sometimes you never do come to terms with the way the meaning of those words comes across by placing them next to each other in a Hopkins poem. That is, the experience of the poem is greater than the individual words are when you look at those words. And it's very difficult when you're used to reading Tennyson, for example, or Wordsworth, or Browning, and you can say, well, what is he doing when he chooses these words? And then you simply clarify the meaning content of the words, and the poem becomes powerful because you raise meaning to the surface. All right? With Hopkins, it doesn't work that way, because much of the meaning of Hopkins isn't going to be accessible by saying, what is the meaning of this word? Not even if you're thinking in terms of connotations. Hopkins takes words and links them together in ways that refuse to be articulated with language. And yet the poem, when read, because of this peculiar combination of sound and rhythm, is more powerful than anything could be expected by the consequence of analyzing the poem. And I'm not comfortable that I can successfully teach Hopkins. I never have been. But I know that he's a poet who is probably more successful at making one feel, and this is the other attraction to Hopkins, he is the most wonderful poet of praise of God. He is the most wonderful poet of despair. Right? It's my situation has changed up until last year, up until this year. I had to be very careful teaching poetry written by devout Christians, because in the university context, you have to sort of cut your own biases aside and speak about it strictly in literary terms. Now, at Eastside Catholic, to teach a Jesuit poet is perfectly all right, and you can, in fact, the time will come, I imagine.
Yeah.
That is what I had always had to do, was to say some people can be accessible to such things. At Eastside, it's a given that this is available to you. And the glory of Hopkins, I think, is that he understands and expresses the complexity of a devout, believing life. That to be a priest is not to be simple-minded. Right? It's not to be one emotion. Because you're a Jesuit priest doesn't mean that you don't have an openness to much of the despair that any ordinary, uncommitted person might have. And Hopkins, as a poet, was able to express the states of the devout in ways, I think, that have never been matched. I think glory, whether it's real in terms of there being really a God or not, is irrelevant. Glory is a human emotion. And I really am not interested, even at Eastside, in debating whether they're glorifying a truth. What I am interested in, at Eastside or at the U, is understanding what it is to say, glory be to God, right? And to make that feeling, which is a universal human feeling in many ways, whether you're talking about nature or whatever it is, come through. And that's that's Hopkins' great skill. When he says, glory be to God for dappled things, you know what he's talking about. And very few poets succeed at that. I may fail today to communicate it. We'll see how it goes. I don't have confidence that I can, but I'd like to try it all the same. Let's start off with a simple poem in structure. Turn to Spring and Fall in your selection. It's on the second sheet on page 63. My most famous favorite poem by Hopkins. It's the one I memorized when I was in college, and I still almost have it in me. I was this morning thinking about today, and I was having second period free, so I was reading over these poems and pondering how to go about them, how to organize them, and I was picking up the poem Spring and looking at it, and I started out, nothing is so, and Mr. Carpenter, who's one of my colleagues, right in the back of me, the other side of the room, said, beautiful as spring. He had the whole poem memorized. So I know there's some power in Hopkins. This is my poem to memorize. And it's more accessible than some of the others, so I thought we would start with a fairly simple poem. This is Spring and Fall to a young child. First, you might notice that this is a poem which doesn't express what Hopkins usually expresses, which is an attempt to come to terms with one's relationship to God or to Christ. Right? It's a less devotional poem, and a poem more addressed towards the human state of transition and change. I'll read it to you first, and then we'll talk a little bit about what's going on in it. Before I start, you'll see slashes above certain syllables. Hopkins was a highly inventive poet, and he wanted to break away from the usual ways of prosody. So he decided that he would create his own way of creating a line. He called it sprung rhythm. And what he did was emphasize a certain number of beats in a line, not the number of syllables. That is, the number of stressed beats. All right? In usual poetry, you write a line which would be, say, iambic pentameter. You're allowed to have 10 syllables, right? And in those 10 syllables, you have, say, 5 stressed beats. He decided to move it more towards music. So he would allow a certain number of beats, but unstressed syllables could be accumulated almost to the nth degree. And he tried to help you with reading his poetry by giving indications of when to stress, when to pause a little bit. And so when you read a Hopkins poem, you want to push a little pressure on those syllables that have the stress on them. He's speaking to a girl, a young child, who's crying because she's seeing the leaves falling from the trees. Absurd reason to cry, right? Margaret, are you grieving over golden grove unleaving? Leaves like things of man, you with your fresh thoughts care for, can you? Ah, as the heart grows older, it will come to such sights colder by and by, nor spare a sigh, though worlds of one would leave me alive. And yet you will weep and know why. Now no matter, child, the name, sorrow's springs are the same, nor mouth had no, nor mind expressed what heart heard of, ghost guessed. It is the blight man was born for, is Margaret you born for. You see, first of all, there's a stance. There's an older human being talking to a younger human being, right? The child who's 8 or 9 or 10 doesn't understand really why she's crying, but she knows that there's a reason to weep when you see the trees losing their leaves. And he looks down from the point of view of the adult, who realizes that there's something very essential in this phenomenon. We age, we lose, and this is life. It's sad. Later on, she'll cry about more important things than leaves. Right? She'll lose her parents, her spouse, her children. But this is growing up, and this is life. It's a very sad but a beautiful poem. Let's start over at the beginning. It starts off with a question. Margaret, are you grieving over golden grove unleaving? I remember reading this the first time, 1964. It's the first time I read this poem. I couldn't understand that second line at all. It didn't make any sense. I was not open to the imaginative quality of that line. Golden grove didn't mean anything to me. And then my professor said, well, look at the words. Hopkins likes to take words and link them. And he's not going to say, he chooses not to say, over the trees losing their leaves. Instead, he rearranges them. What is a tree in October? Golden, right? It's a golden grove. Right? It's one word. So by linking those words, he recreates the whole phenomenon. It gives a unity to the forest that you don't get by saying in the fall the trees lose their leaves, right? It's the whole grove turning color at once. Vermont, right now, I imagine, I suppose, right? But everything is beautiful. But the point about Vermont in October is that those leaves are ready to fall, right? That is implicit in the beauty is the loss of that beauty. We don't think of this in terms of green leaves, do we? And they're to last forever. And they get old and sort of scrungy as time goes on. But as soon as you see those leaves on the verge, you know that that beauty is temporary. And she knows that. The other word is unleaving. So you get the beauty, but at the same time, unleaving. They're falling down. The leaves are falling. And then he comments on it, on the oddity of this, right? Leaves, like the things of man, you with your fresh thoughts care for. Can you? Right? You're not supposed to cry about leaves. What do you cry about? The things of man, he says, right? You cry about human tragedies. We don't cry about leaves falling off trees. That's the normal world. What makes it possible for a human being to cry about leaves falling from trees? No. What is it? No. Why is it that she can cry about leaves? Not yet. She doesn't know that. What is it? Youth. Right? Only an innocent, right? Only an innocent wastes emotional energy on something like that. That's the idea. You see, the fresh thoughts. How you don't know enough, right? You're going to have enough to cry about later on, right? Hold off here. Don't cry about every leaf that falls off the tree. It's not going to be right economical. But a child, right? My daughter will respond that way, right? If you step on a bug and she'll feel sad. Oh, poor bug, poor little ant. Emily, don't waste your energy on it. It's not worth it. But she's only 5. And he's seeing, what you want to catch is that there is a double emotion going on here. Seeing the child able to weep reminds him he can't weep over them anymore. Right? He knows too much about this, right? We lose the ability, lose that ability as time passes. There's too much that's more important than leaves. So the first comment is, can't you do this? The implication is, I can't. Right? Leaves like the things of man, you with your fresh thoughts care for. Can you? Who does not have fresh thoughts? The poet. The poet does not. He's lost the fresh thoughts years ago. And the next word is What is that? Oh, wisdom, right? Oh. And you get a Ben Franklin statement here practically, right? As the heart grows older, it will come to such sights colder by and by. Is that right?
Yeah.
Old wisdom speaking. But the is the of loss, isn't it? That he himself knows, I can't do it. And you will grow older too. Some of you have taught high school. I find myself saying to these kids now, you just wait 10 years. Right? You wait 20 years and then you will see. The awful voice of wisdom to the youth who doesn't want to hear wisdom, right? Who wants to go through it themselves. And this is what's happening in this poem. You will come to such sights colder by, and then he goes on, nor spare a sigh, the world that one would leave me alive. You're crying over one grove. The day will come when every tree in the world can have its leaves. And you notice this is, again, odd words, right? Wanwood. What does wanwood mean to you? It's a made-up word.
Pale.
Pale, right?
Ash.
And what happens? They fall down. They turn. It's not gold now, but leaf meal, right? Right. If every leaf on every tree in the world fell down and turned into meal, you wouldn't drop it to you, right? The time will come when you could care less, by and by, right? When you could care less. And then you get, of course, the problem. And yet, you will weep. I know why. Daddy, why do leaves fall from trees? Why am I sad? She doesn't know that answer. She's asked the question, and all he can do is say, time will tell you, right? You know, I can tell you that it's not okay. You must cry. Give yourself time. You get the answer. Now, no matter, child, the name. Right? What does he mean by that? Don't think about the name. What does that mean to you? Don't think about the name. What does it mean? Can you get anything out of that? See, the child is asking, why am I crying? Why am I sad about this? It's not the leaves. It's not the leaves. It's not the leaves. The leaves are the leaves. You are crying for something other than leaves, but you don't know it, right? Sorrow springs are the same. Why do you cry? You cry for loss. Right? Not the particular leaf, but every human, however young, knows that you lose what is beautiful. Right? You get old, and you're practicing, right? In a sense. You are crying for the same reason that I cry that my mother died. Right? Loss. Loss. So sorrow springs, that is where it comes from. It's the same. It's the same. Sorrow springs are the same, nor mouth had, no, nor mind expressed, but heart heard of, most guessed. It's difficult, but not that difficult. It's a neither nor, not nor. The mouth, he says, no mouth ever said it, right? No mind ever conceived what it is we're talking about. In other words will not answer your question, right? But you know here, which is what she's crying about. Not here. Here, in her heart, in her breast. And you get those awful last two lines. It is the blight man was born for. That's the universal, right? And blight is, of course, a word that applies to trees, doesn't it?
Yes.
As we get old. Why is she crying? Because man dies. It is martyrs you mourn. And mourn implies death, of course. She's crying about being alive, getting old. It's a lovely poem. It's a marvelous poem. I have to read one that came to mind last night. Virginia and Mary debauched me all evening here at the club with lamb and other things, and reminded me of a poem that I forgot to ditto off. In fact, I couldn't find it, so I went home and dug around boxes of books until I found my copy of it. It's called Heaven Haven. A Nun Takes the Veil. Did you find the poem, Mary?
I found it, yes.
Yeah. It's a very short poem and a very simple one. I think fairly understandable and beautiful. It's why would you want to take the veil? Why become a nun? The image of the title tells you something. Heaven, haven. He's playing with words, right? Protection, peace, ship in a storm, right? In port. I have desired to go where springs not fail, to fields where flies no sharp and sided hail, and a few lilies blow. And I have asked to be where no storms come, where the green swell is in the haven done, and out of the swing of the sea. He's not saying this is the only reason, but he's saying it's one of the reasons, right? Where springs not fail. It is to find access to spring. Water is coming up, right? Every place else on earth you will lose it, but maybe not with God, with the community. A lovely poem from a cleric. That's for Mary, because we were talking about that last night. All right, let's try a poem of glory. I sat there for 10 minutes trying to decide whether I should start out with happy poems and end with despairing poems, or start out with despairing poems and then move to happy poems, and I don't think I've solved the problem. Turn to the Windhover. It's on the first page. I thought I'd start with a fairly tough one, but in many ways a super poem. The subtitle is very important. To Christ our Lord. This is a poem which doesn't look like it, but which is a poem of praise to Christ and to the relationship that Christ offers to the believer. Okay. Let me read it through first, and just listen to the words without worrying about them not coming through, because they won't come through very well. And then we'll talk about how he sets it up. Think in particular of how the words represent the sweep of the bird. He sees a Windhover, and the poem is to reduplicate the motion of the bird in the sky, this bird that's up there in glory, and becomes for him a symbol of Christ. Okay? The bird becomes Christ in a sense. I caught this morning, morning's minion, kingdom of daylight's dauphin, dapple dawn-drawn falcon, in his riding of the rolling level underneath him steady air, and striding high there, how he rung upon the rein of a whimpering wing in his ecstasy. Then off, forth on swing as a skate's heel sweeps smooth on a bow bend. The hurl and gliding rebuffed the big wind. My heart in hiding stirred for a bird, the achieve of, mastery of the thing. Brute beauty and valor and act, oh, air, pride, plume, here, buckle, and the fire that breaks from thee, then a billion times more lovelier, more dangerous, oh, my chevalier. No wonder of it, sheer plod makes prow down, Cillian shine, and blue bleak embers, fall, gall themselves, and gash gold vermilion. Well, it took me years to understand that poem. I still don't understand some of it, but I understand the emotion. It's a heightening up of attention in response to the emotion he feels about that bird. The key word in that whole poem is the word buckle, which we'll get to in a second, as he relates himself to it. Let's start, read a few of it, and not make too much of it. Let's see if we can maybe get some relationship to it. I caught this morning, morning's minion, kingdom of daylight's dauphin. Right? Here's the bird. He loves sounds, by the way. You can see it. Sometimes the words seem to be there only for their sounds, right? Daylight's dauphin, dapple dawn, drawn falcon. What does he like? He likes D's, just work on that and the awe as the sound's moving it along. I saw this morning, morning's minion, morning's child, right? Morning slave, morning servant, right? I saw it up there, okay? Kingdom of daylight's dauphin, okay? Kingdom of daylight's dauphin. Can we do anything with those words? The dauphin is... Right. Okay, the Prince of Wales of France, right? Yeah. So is that bird special? That is, he is the son of morning, in a sense, right? That he's up there, it's wonder. Then he says, dapple dawn drawn falcon. Windhover is a kind of falcon. Dapple, multicolored, dawn drawn. What do you get there?
Drawn out by the dawn.
Yes, okay. You can see him moving in his multicolored, just almost as though he's created by the dawn, right? As the sun rises, the bird is just drawn across the sky. Dapple dawn drawn falcon. In his riding, now watch this, you can see him up there swooping around, of the rolling level underneath him steady air. Sounds just like the bird, right? What's it like? We are insecure in air. Is the bird insecure? No, he's not. Underneath him steady, he says, but all the same it's whoosh, right? You can feel like a roller coaster. Rolling level underneath him steady air. And striding. The word stride is so nice. The bird takes it, right, in strides. The bird is having a wonderful time, and he's feeling the pleasure that this bird has in his element. Okay? He's in his element, and striding high there, how he rung upon the rein of a wimpling wing in his ecstasy. So what he does is he goes up, right? You can see him up on he's ringing up on the top, perfect, and then when he gets up there, what does he do? Then off, right? Forth on a swing. I love that word, forth on a swing. It's just like, for me, the image is that of a swing, where you're up at the very peak, right? At the very top of the arc, and then, boom, down you go. And he's watching this bird, and he's saying, oh, glory, my gosh. Forth on a swing, and the image then, as a skate's heel sweeps, smooth on a ball. What's the image there? Right, can you feel the skate? It's like you're ice skating, right? And you get that arc, boom, of a perfect skater. Someone in the Olympics, not me, I can't do it. But I know the image, right? That sense of perfect shape. Just perfect, smooth, beautiful. And he says, the hurl and gliding rebuffed the big wind. Meaning the wind here wanted to take over, but nothing takes over this bird, right? It says, nope, I'm in charge here. And then the crucial movement in the poem. We've got the bird up there. My heart in hiding, stirred for a bird. Yeah. What does heart in hiding mean? What does a heart in hiding mean? To have your heart in hiding. Something he's very aware of is ego. Right? And we go through life protecting ourselves, right? I keep my heart down here where you can't see it inside my body, because if you see it, you might hurt it, right? Right. You don't show your emotion. You hide yourself because it's protective, coloring. But sometimes God gets you anyway. And he didn't know it, but at this moment, on this morning, as he's watching this bird, all of a sudden, this heart, which he thought was so well protected from any dangerous emotions, is, right? I mean, this is God coming to you and getting you. And he finds himself saying, the achiever, the master. And then this is Christ, of course, at the same time, calling to him. Remember, he's a priest. The next stanza, brute beauty and valor and act. And then you get a sort of sequence of almost ejaculatory words, right? Notice the commas after each one. Oh, air, pride, plume, here, and then buckle, right? Buckle is a wonderful word because it means lots of things. But on the one hand, it means connection, right? I made it, like you buckle your belt. Caught, right? Finally, he's seeing what it means. This is Christ, right? You connect with him at the same sense. But his heart in hiding should remind you of another meaning for buckle. As a human being, collapse, right? You have to crumble under Christ's power. You have to humble yourself in front of him. So here's the word buckle working at least two ways. One, making the connection. The other, submitting finally to the glory of this creature or of Christ. Right? So it works two ways.
Do you mean that Christ buckled and that Christ?
It means, he buckles. His ego, his protective shell, right? Under the power of this, he wants to isolate himself, separate himself, but this bird, all of a sudden, he gives up. I mean, the power of of God in this animal has got through to him, and so he crumbles, but the crumbling is also, right? I finally got it. Right? It's the use of nature to bring God to you, to break through your isolated self. We'll see it in some of the despair poems later on. Pride, right? Pride. It's always the downfall of the Christian, right? Martin Luther says that the trouble with being a Christian. You know the image Martin Luther uses? He says every Christian learns that humbleness is a virtue, and so every good Christian starts out being humble. And he says the trouble is that you start out like this, and you look down in humbleness before God, and you see your feet, and you pray, and then you look up and you say, my, how humble I am. You start looking at yourself, right? You start looking at the ground and you see your own feet, and before you know it, you're saying, my, what a wonderful, humble person I am. And it destroys it. So that sense of submitting is very strong here. It's especially hard for Hopkins. Hopkins was a very prideful man. He was a tremendously talented human being. And to say, I abase myself before you, is extremely hard. And much of his poetry is about that. To get down to where you are, where you belong, vis-a-vis Christ or God. So here is, and once you do it, you see, crumble, and then he says, the fire that breaks from thee then. Right? The image later on in the poem is going to be of coals on a fire, where the fire has died, and then and it's all gray, right? And then the coals break, and when they break, you see inside, right? The beauty of the inside, heat red hot inside, right? But gray on the outside. And you have to make that connection to see it, right? It's inside, it's not the outside. The fire that breaks from thee then, 1,000,000,000 times told lovelier, more dangerous. Dangerous to us, right? So our ego already, oh, my chevalier. Chevalier is a horseman. So the bird becomes Christ. What a beautiful word. But the problem is when that connection is made, whole new visions appear. It starts out with a bird who's wonderful, but it's 1,000,000,000 times. If you get to Christ, right, you think that bird touches you. Wait until you make the connection, the real connection, you see. The bird is nothing to him, nothing at all. No wonder of it. Meaning, don't be surprised at what I said. This is the way it is, right? Sheer plod makes plow down Cillian shine. All that means is, when you translate it, is that what makes, when you plow the earth as a farmer, it's toil that turns the earth over, right? It's hard work getting out there behind the plow and pushing it, but when the plow curves through the earth, it turns it up, and as it turns it up, you see the shine on the earth as a result of the work. It's the work, it's hard work, but all the same, the earth will produce its glory all the same. Right? Beautiful.
Is Cillian found the word 1,000,000,000, trillion?
Yeah, it's picking up that, but here it just means the earth turned up. Yeah, but it's picked because it fits billion. Yeah. And blue bleak embers, and there's the other one, right? At the end of the fire, the fire is nothing at all, and then, oh my dear, fall, gall themselves, and gash, gold, vermilion. You can see the fireplace. That's how you get to it, of course. You have to go through the fire first, don't you? The fire has to burn and turn gray and ugly, and then inside those coals, as they crumble, you see a billion times told lovelier, what you saw before. So it's a poem to Christ, our Lord. And he's trying to use the poem to give you a chance to connect through poetry, as he believes is possible. It's a wonderful poem. Let's try Spring. Let's try Spring. It's the second sheet from the back. I'll do this one quickly, if I can. This is the one my co-worker at East Side had memorized. Took the words right out of my mouth. Nothing is so beautiful as spring, when weeds in wheels shoot long and lovely and lush. Thrush's eggs look little low heavens, and thrush through the echoing timber does so rinse and ring the ear it strikes like lightnings to hear him sing. The glassy pear tree leaves and blooms, they brush the descending blue. That blue is all in a rush with richness. The racing lambs too have fair their fling. What is all this juice and all this joy? A strain of the earth's sweet being in the beginning, an Eden garden. Have, get, before it cloy, before it cloud, Christ, Lord, and sour with sinning, innocent mind, and May Day, and girl and boy, most, O maid's child, thy choice, worthy the ring. A lovely poem. He's saying you get, how long does spring last? But every year you get a memory of what Eden was like, right? When those thrushes are out there. He likes to use words in odd ways, make a verb out of a noun and vice versa. When weeds and wheels shoot long and lovely and lush, right? Do you think of weeds and wheels?
Yes.
In a sense of motion. Yeah, like the opening, up they come. But he's working on a sense of motion at the same time, right? Bam, 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 and they just come shooting out of the earth, right? Weeds do. Who wants weeds? He says, I want weeds, right? I want growth in nature. Thrush's eggs look little low heavens. Can that be a heaven? I don't know. And then he uses the word thrush as though it were a verb, right? And thrush through the echoing timber does so rinse and ring. Can you think of birds as, or thrushes as an action? Look at all the threshing going on. Well, actually, in the sense that the permeation of threshing, right? Here they are. He says it strikes like lightnings to hear the sing. The other words are all very nice. Racing lambs, too, have fair their fling. That's nice. I think of the lambs bouncing back and forth. And, of course, he gives you what it is in the next stanza. It's a fairly straightforward poem for Hopkins. What is all this juice and all this joy? He says it's a strain of the earth's sweet being in the beginning, in Eden garden. What should you do? Have. Get. Yeah. I think there's a conscious echo of the Eucharist here, right? You come, right? All who want have. He's offering it almost as a sacramental, isn't he? Offering to us. Interestingly done. Before it cloud, Christ, Lord, and sour with sinning. Because summer will come to him too. That's a very nice little poem. Should we try another happy one? As kingfishers catch fire. This is on the third page. Another poem. As kingfishers catch fire, dragonflies draw flame. As tumbled over rim and roundy wells, stones ring. Like each tucked string tells, each hung bell's bow swung finds tongue to fling out broad its name. Each mortal thing does one thing and the same. Deals out that being indoors each one dwells, selves, goes itself. myself it speaks and spells, crying, what I do is me, for that I came. I say more, the just man justices, keeps grace, that keeps all his goings graces, acts in God's eye what in God's eye he is. Christ, for Christ plays in 10,000 places, lovely in limbs, and lovely in eyes not his, to the Father, through the features of men's faces. It's really a beautiful poem. You could probably summarize it in very few words. The world is multitudinous, and each thing is what it is to be, right? Each of us is. Christ doesn't say there's only one of you that's for me. All of your faces are for me. Be the person you are. Be your intrinsic. The just man justices. What an odd way of saying it. But that you are not just your interior. You are the essence of yourself. And Hopkins is very strong in arguing that each of us is valuable for what we are. The kingfisher is valuable for being a kingfisher. Don't ask it to be a lion, right? The dragonflies draw flame. The image is marvelous, right? You can see it coming up. Because he's a dragonfly, right? That's what he is. He says, as kingfishers catch fire, dragonflies draw flame. They're so different, right? In fact, a kingfisher would eat a dragonfly if he got the chance. But you notice that both of them carry their flame, don't they? That is, they share that essential quality of their uniqueness, their spirit, their selves. Everything, every bell, right, flings out its broad name. Right? Each mortal thing does one thing and the same. Each of us is ourself. To be ourselves is good. It deals out that being indoors each one dwells. Selves, goes itself. Myself it speaks and spells. All he's saying here is that everything says myself. I am me. A bell, when it rings, is saying, I am this bell, right? A kingfisher is saying, I am this bird. This is me. I am proud of me, in a sense. Crying, what I do is me. For that I came. It's a lovely concept, isn't it? But he goes much further. He says it's not only that, right? These elements that he's talked about are non-human elements. And he's more than happy to have each of those non-human elements be themselves. A bell is a bell, great. But the just man justices. We have a special quality as human beings. Keeps grace. That keeps all his goings graces. A just man carries his grace with him wherever he goes. Right? Whatever he's doing, he carries his grace. His beauty, in other words, in a sense. Acts in God's eye what in God's eye he is, which is the just man. Right? He sees that. And then he moves to Christ. For Christ plays in 10,000 places, lovely in limbs, and lovely in eyes not his, to the Father, to the features of men's faces. How does Christ face God?
In each one of us.
Yeah.
What you want rather than one.
That's right. You are, right? And every just man is Christ. Christ lives in the goodness of the people in the world who carry justice, who carry grace. Christ doesn't go there himself. He is you. And there's the power, of course, and the strength. You can see from a poem like this why Hopkins wanted to be a priest, why he wanted to carry that quality of grace that he sees in it. It's a lovely poem. Okay, that's As Kingfishers Catch Fire. Let's see. Let's skip over to High Beauty. I wasn't going to do it at this point, but I think now is the time. It's the bottom of the first page. It's connected, actually, to this poem, The Glory of Every Individual Thing. And I think for many of you, this may be his favorite poem, your favorite poem. It's close to being my favorite of him. It's very reminiscent of Emily Dickinson's poem where she's attacking brittle ladies. who are so wonderfully controlled and delicate that they can't accept getting freckled, right? And Dickinson says, be careful because God will be so ashamed of you when the time comes. If you are ashamed of a normal function of being alive, she calls them a fisherman's degree, freckles. He's talking about the same thing. He does not want everything to be like everything else. Glory be to God for dappled things, for skies of couple color, as a brinded cow, for rose moles all in stipple upon trout that swim, fresh fire-cold chestnut falls, finch's wings, landscape plotted and pieced, fold, fallow, and plow, and all trades their gear, tackle, and trim, all things counter, original, spare, strange, whatever is fickle, freckled, who knows how, with swift, slow, sweet, sour, a dazzle, dim, he fathers forth whose beauty is past change. Praise him. The last two lines tell you the secret of it, right? It's a God who does not change, right? He fathers all of the one God has created this diversity. It's a paradox which simply cannot be understood. One would expect a God who does not change to produce one quality of his beauty. But the glory of God is that he creates diversity, contrast, individuality. Praise God that he is so ununified in his manifestations. The poem is in praise of individuality. And not a hard poem to understand either. It starts out with a statement. Praise be to God, glory be to God for dappled things. Dapple means variegated, splatted, right? Varieties of colors, like my skin. And he gives us a wide variety of ways in which we see beautiful, dappled experiences. Starts out with, for skies of couple color, as a brinded cow. Right? For skies that look like a cow. Can you imagine the cow there then? All these spots all over it. I see it heading east when I'm going to Belgium in the morning sometimes. Hard to believe. There was one 2 weeks ago on Thursday morning that just about destroyed me. It was so beautiful. Did you see that? Oh, yeah. Okay. That God gives us that, in other words. For rose moles, all in stipple upon trout that swim. He moves from the broadest vision down to one. Right? I remember one critic saying, after you've read this poem, you never. Turn in your handout to Felix Randal on the last sheet. This is a wonderful, painful poem, and I'm shifting now to look more closely at what he experiences as a result of being a priest, and the Christian dilemma that he had to come to terms with. Felix Randal is a particularly powerful poem because in it he contemplates what it means to be a pastor and to face death, and to face loss. I assume it's similar to a physician who loses a patient, right? And to understand what it means that human beings die. Felix Randal has died. And he's a farrier, that is, he's a man who shoes horses. And all of his life was a powerful man of strength. What we have, however, is that Hopkins is having to face the fact that he's lost a patient as a priest. And what does it mean to have brought to his parishioner hope, right, for a future, for salvation, and then know that that person dies? The poem seems to be written as though it were on the first news that Felix Randal has died. But it's more a contemplation on what it is to be a priest than it is to be Felix Randal. Felix Randal, the farrier. Oh, is he dead then? My duty all ended. Who have washed his mold of man, big boned and hardy handsome, pining, till time when reason rambled in it, and some fatal four disorders fleshed there, all contended. Sickness broke him. Impatient he cursed at first, but mended, being anointed and all. Though a heavenlier heart began some months earlier, since I had our sweet reprieve and ransom tendered to him. Ah, well, God rest him all road ever he offended. This seeing the sick endears them to us. Us too it endears. My tongue had taught thee comfort. Touch had quenched thy tears that touched my heart. Child, Felix, poor Felix Randal, how far from then forethought of all thy more boisterous years, when thou with a random grim forge, powerful amidst peers, didst fettle for the great grey dray horse his bright and battering sound. We're back to Margaret in some ways here, as you can see. It's actually four different meditations, in a sense, on the news. The first one is the shock, right? Is he dead? Has he finally died? We who have watched his mold of man, mold is a double-edged word, as you know. It's also M-O-L-D, right? But here it's shape, right? Big boned, hardy, handsome. I look at photographs of my grandfather, who was over 6 feet tall when he was 20, and think, gosh, did that man become old and die, right? Sure he did. And Felix Randal, who was a blacksmith, how big are blacksmiths? Right? You know what Longfellow says, right? Hardy, handsome. But he didn't die quickly. He died slowly, pining, right? Pining. In fact, his body, which was so strong, became really an arena of combat. What killed him? 4 fatal disorders. I mean, if one thing didn't get him, something else would have got him. Right? He was going to lose. Fatal 4 disorders flushed there, all contended. We don't even know what it is that killed him, but we know that he didn't have a chance. And he watched himself. I like the word flesh there because it's set up against pining, right? It is to have your body pine away is to lose weight, right? Thin, and what is getting stronger all the time? Whatever it is, yes, they fight, getting stronger and stronger for his body. But he lost.
Till time when reason rambled with that
Yes, he lost. He became delirious, right? Yes. Pining till time when reason rambled in it. Well, sickness broke him, his body. At first, how did he feel? He was angry, right? He cursed. The problem for the priest is, what do you do when you come across a patient who is so mad at God, right, and at life, that at his age, you can imagine the things he might have been saying. He could condemn himself to hell from the point of view of the church out of his anger. And the priest's task is to bring him around, to accept this as a natural part of life. He cursed at first, but mended, being anointed and all. What does that mean? Mend means repaired, okay? But being anointed and all, what does that mean? Okay, right, confession. These are the rites of the Catholic Church. And this is what, of course, our poet Hopkins offered him. He offered him the consolation of the Eucharist and of the unction, right? So he meant it as though the ranting were a terrible sin. He repaired himself. One of the blessings of the church for someone like Hopkins is that it allows you to repair yourself from your natural failings. And he can say, all right, yes, you made a sin, you should not have cursed, right? But that's human, and Christ is still here to repair it. Forget about it. The church could offer that to Felix Randal. Though a heavenlier heart began some months earlier, since I had our sweet reprieve and ransom tendered to him. Now, in other words, these 2 lines express a whole shift in Felix Randal's opportunity. When did he start to become Christian? Well, before he was angry, right? It doesn't go the other way around. You don't just become a Christian and then you're saintly until you die, right? Hopkins is saying that he had accepted the church and the offer of the church, our reprieve and ransom, from the state, obviously. But it didn't prevent him from being angry as hell, right, when the time came. It's still the priest's job to work his flock through the natural emotions of it. But he knew that hope was there from the beginning, as soon as Felix Randal became a Christian, in other words. And the last line of this stanza is his blessing on the life, right? Ah, well, God rest him all rule that working upon him. It's an odd way of saying it. What's he saying? What is he saying?
No matter what he did.
Whatever he says. The idea of life as a road, I think, is quite interesting. You can't go through life without running through some stoplights, right? Or whatever it is you do on the road of life. And as a priest, he's saying, may God forgive him for what he didn't know enough to request forgiveness from you. And that's the generosity that the priest would want to have through the church. But the real crunch comes here in the next stanza, right? This seeing the sick endears them to us. Us too, it endears. Finish it. Thus too it endears to others, to Christ, to God, right? That is, our response to the needs of the sick creates a loving attitude towards us in a priest who is not responsive to the needs of his people. He's going to have a hard time when he has to justify his priesthood to God, right? That is, he understands that he gets something out of Felix Randal's sin, his pain, and his death. So here's the priest thinking about, what is it to me that I'm a priest and that I love Felix Randal? It's not easy to be around somebody dying a painful death, as this man did, but it's part of my job, and he's trying to find that justification. My tongue had taught thee comfort. Touch had quenched thy tears that touched my heart. The whole structure of this stanza is that of touching, right, of reaching out. Endearing response, creating an endearing response. I touched you, right? I spoke to you. You touched me. Notice that something's happening. He does not define the priesthood as simply me to you, right? He doesn't see being a priest as simply going through life offering blessings to other people. It comes back. It's a receiving as well. He's not an elevated image of himself as a priest, just the opposite. In a sense, what he's saying is that you are more important to me than I am to you, right? I need your life to be me. Thy tears that touched my heart. Child. Was Felix Randal a child?
No, he was a child of God.
He was a child of God, yes. Felix. That was the first word, right? Not Mr. Randal. Poor Felix Randal. Are we all poor Felix Randal? Sure we are. All of us. And then you get that Margaret poem, right? Yeah. How far from then forethought of all thy more boisterous years. When you were 21, how little you knew, right? How little any of us know. And the image of these last two lines usually is read by critics as seeing the average Christian working for Christ. The great dray horse is almost always interpreted by readers as Christ himself. That the Christian creates through his Christian life, though he may not know it at the time, the sandal. Right? Sandal is, of course, horses don't wear sandals, they wear horseshoes. But Christ wore a sandal, right? And the sense of the power of that image, a Clydesdale, right? We all work to that end. And he, in his life, in a sense, Hopkins is saying, was working for Christ, giving him his shoes. All trades, in other words, right? Their gear, their tackle and trim. You may be nothing more than a farrier, but you have your value and your place in the kingdom of God. How little we knew when thou, at the random, grim forge, powerful amidst peers, didst fettle for that great gray horse, this bright and battering sand. What an image. That's a marvelous last line. Can you see the horse's hoofs, right? Shining with his new horseshoe, hitting the rocks, the stones, and flashing in the sun. Felix Randal is dead now, but he played his role as a human being, lived his life, and gave it up. It's a wonderful poem.
I wonder if you thought of that. Felix means happy. Poor
Never occurred to me, but it could easily. Yeah, he knew his Latin. There's no doubt about that. Yeah, he's happy now. Very good. Turn over to "Thou art indeed just, Lord," which should be on the third from the end, I believe. You find it there? Now we're moving into more sober poetry, even than that. This is it's an extension of Jeremiah 12, based on the Vulgate version of that, which starts out in the King James Version. Righteous art thou, O Lord, when I plead with thee, yet let me talk with thee of thy judgments. Wherefore doth the way of the wicked prosper? All right, remember that passage from the Bible? It's the great lament of the Old Testament, right? The Jeremiah and the Old Testament prophets wanted to know, why is it that the wicked prosper and the good suffer? I mean, where is the justice? Job learned that pretty hard, right? That being a good man, a devout believer in God, and dedicating your life to God doesn't guarantee you anything on this earth. You may lose everything as he does. So it's the great lament. And of course it's a great lament for Hopkins, who is a priest, who looks around and sees, it may be momentary, but all the same, the failure of his hopes at times as a priest. Why is it that Jay Gould and Rockefeller, right, and the Titans live in luxury, and good people live in misery? Right? How is that?
Why me when it's bad?
Yeah, here he is, and it's a wonderful poem. Thou art indeed just, Lord, if I contend with thee. But, sir, so what I plead is just. Why do sinners' ways prosper? And why must disappointment all I endeavor end? Wert thou my enemy, O thou my friend, how wouldst thou worst, I wonder, than thou dost defeat? Thwart me. Oh, the sots and thralls of lust do in spare hours more thrive than I that spend, sir, life upon thy cause. See, banks and breaks now leaving, how thick, laced they are again with fretty chervil. Look, and fresh winds shake them. Birds build, but not I build. No, but strain, time's eunuch, and not breed one work that wakes. Mine, O thou Lord of life, send my roots rain. So, it's a very powerful poem. A hard one to read out loud, by the way. I find that it chokes me up when I read it. You can see the center lines are the ones that I think are, how is it, he says, the sots and thralls of lust do in spare hours more thrive than I that spend, sir, life upon thy cause. I think any minister, any person of the gospel must say sometimes to themselves in their moments of weakness, what have I got out of this? Right? The people who spend their life, he says, those who are the sots and thralls of lust, that is, those who have given themselves over to drunkenness, right, to the body, in their spare hours, he says, it's not that they're whole, he says they get more just in their casual moments than I who've given my whole life to the church. Where is my reward? Right? You know, give me something. What a claim to make as a priest. Let's start off and look at it again. He says, thou art indeed just, Lord, if I contend with thee. What does that mean?
No matter what, I'm just. I know
Right. He says, if I go after you, right, if I fight with you, I know you'll be fair about it, right? That is, you won't any punishment I get, I will deserve, right? The more I fight with you, the more you will punish me. All right. Punish me for my aggression, my unwillingness, right, to humble myself to your cause. I recognize your justice, okay? He says, since you are just, okay, give me a minute, make a recognition of my just claim, right? But sir, now watch that. You don't call God sir. The French do, right? But we do not. You notice what he's doing there? He's sort of bringing God down to a point of reasonable. I mean, it's not disrespectful, but all the same. But sir, right? You could. Students will say that to you, right? Trying to. Yeah, I know you're boss, but all the same, I have a reasonable request. And he makes the claim. So what I plead is just. And you can see the boss. He's not going to pay attention to this at all. But the need for justice is very strong. Right? I just want what is mine. Right? By deserts. I've given up everything. I have no wife, no children, right? No occupation. 24 hours a day I'm at your service. What do I get from it? Maybe nothing. Right? No. And that's what he wants. He wants something. He says, what I plead is just. And then you get those awful lines out of Jeremiah. Why do sinners' ways prosper? And why must disappointment all I endeavor in? There was no answer to that question for Jeremiah, and there's not going to be an answer for it now. Okay? I was at an Archdiocesan Youth Service a week ago, listening to Father Lawrence Riley, who was talking about the church and the kinds of moral dilemmas. And one of the points he made about the Catholic Church is that Catholics have always wanted a specific, clear reason for things, right? And he pointed out, he said that in the 19th century, the theologians had determined that you could look at a woman lustfully for 30 seconds before you were condemned to mortal sin. 29 seconds is all right, but which made it easy for the little boys in the 19th century. They could time themselves. If they had those underwater watches, you could ogle for 20 seconds and come off free.
Jimmy Carter will turn Catholic.
Well, yeah, you got to have that second hand. You find yourself with a bad watch and you'd be in trouble. But he was using that as a representative of if we know, right? If you have those nice, clean laws, right? If you put out a little bit, you get a little bit, right? You do this, that will happen. And they had the church organized so that so many prayers would release you from exactly so many minutes in purgatory. And the Catholics, he said, have always wanted those nice, clean answers. You see here that tendency, right? He says, all right, give me a specific answer to a specific. Why is this the case? Right? Why is the rich man not dying? Why doesn't he get cancer? Why do I get cancer, right? Why is my good mother dying and that evil boy living in luxury? But does God ever answer that question? He will not do it. He's not going to become a nitpicker with us. But the need for us to pick nits is very strong. And it's a big nit, too, if you think of it in his term. Why is it, he said, that everything I try ends up in, where's my glory? Right? Where's my glory? Now, we know where the glory is because we've just read Felix Randal. Right? He understands, too. But it's not going to be in the context of this poem at all. And then you get another hard question. Wert thou my enemy? Is he saying you're my enemy? O thou my friend. How wouldst thou worse, I wonder, than thou dost defeat more? He's not saying you are my enemy, but he is asking a hard question. What could you do if you were my enemy that would be worse? But think of Job, right? I mean, if anybody had a right to say to God, hey, what could be, I've given my life to you, God, and look what's happened to me. What would you do if you were the devil? Right? Well, we know it because the devil did it to him, right? I mean, God gave the devil permission to bedevil Job to the nth degree. The only thing the devil couldn't do to Job was kill him, right? He could do anything else he wanted. This is the same lament. And how does God respond to that? How I wonder that thou dost defeat, thwart me. Then that line. That's that I that spend, sir, life upon my cause. Then he looks around him at the world, and he sees, to make it hurt, he sees that every quality, every element of life has its own rejuvenation, right? I mean, the most useless of all plants and shrubs, right, with their thorns, the plants you want to destroy, you get rid of them. Banks and brakes, right? Now leave it how thick. Laced they are again, with fretty chervil. The fretted is the interlaced pattern. I mean, these things, they just keep growing. Look, fresh wind shakes them. Am I less than that bramble bush to you, that you give it rejuvenation, nothing to me? Hard question as well. Birds build, but not I build. Takes you back, of course, to the New Testament, where Christ said, right? Not a sparrow falls, right? Not a flower grows, but God notices it. Think then how he feels about you. And he's turning it right around. He's saying, I know that birds take care of themselves, right? Plants grow. Where's the evidence that he cares about me? See? Where's the evidence? But not I build. No. But strain times eunuch. And not breathe one word that wakes. A eunuch is a castrated man, right? And he says, I am a castrated man trying to breathe. What a frustration, right? What a life. You have nothing to create. Nothing interior. What an awful image. It was a terrible image. To feel that way, the need to create, to produce, and God gives you no help whatsoever. He's taken away the ability. Mine, oh, thou Lord of life, send mine its rain. Takes you back to the plant image, right? Give me something to rely on. And there is Christian despair. You notice he is not saying, I am not keeping my faith. In fact, throughout, he reminds us, it is, O thou my friend, O thou Lord of life. He still believes in God, but God isn't going to make it easy at all. It's going to get worse before it gets better. Turn to, no, I'll not carry in comfort, despair.
Don't you think that everybody in some way is scared this small?
I think so. Yeah.
Why this happens to me?
I
And
think
Such a good kid.
faith gets shaken.
I think it's especially dangerous for people who don't realize how complex it can be to have faith. Who think that it's something nice, like you get it and you keep it, and you put it on a shelf, and it's always there to draw on. No,
Right.
it's not.
No.
Yeah, it's this one here. Yeah, no, I'll not.
You find Carrion comfort there?
Yeah.
On page 67. No, I'll not carry in comfort, despair, not feast on thee. Not untwist, slack they may be, these last strands of man in me, or most weary cry, I can no more, I can. Can something, hope, wish day come, not choose not to be. But oh, thou terrible, why wouldst thou root on me thy ring-whirled right foot rock? Lay a lion limb against me, scan with darksome devouring eyes my bruised bones, and fan, in turns of tempest, me heap there, me frantic to avoid thee, and flee. Why? That my chaff might fly, my grain lie sheer, clear. Nay, in all that toil, that coil, since seems I kiss the rod, hand rather, my heart low, lap strength, stole joy, would laugh, cheer whom though? The hero whose heaven handling flung me, foot trod me, or me that fought him. Oh, which one? Is it each one? That night, that year, of now done darkness, I, wretch, lay wrestling with my God. This is my favorite of these poems. It's a little complex for us to do, but I'll run through it quickly. This is the poem that takes you back to the image I gave you from Martin Luther. Right? What is the motivation behind one's action? And this is the answer to in a sense, to the poem we just read. Why do you suffer? That my grain, that my chaff fly, that my grain lie sheer and clear. Right? That the pain he lives under is for a reason. God does it for a reason. He's making you the person you are to be. Let's start out in the beginning. No, not. Starts out with not, the strongest of the negatives. I'll not carry in comfort, despair, not feast on thee. What does carry in comfort mean? Okay, carrying is dead bodies, right? He says, I will not feast on the carrion comfort of despair. What does that mean? Oh, it does have comfort. It does have comfort.
It be.
Can you enjoy can you enjoy despair?
Yes.
Yes. The word feast is there, right? I mean, the temptation to fall into despair and to eat on it, right? I'll show you, watch me, look at this, right? Oh, despair. Look how miserable I am. It's all your fault, right? Can you feel what he's saying? The temptation to take despair to your breast and hug it like this and say, look at my miserable life. Give me some more, right? Make me more miserable. I challenge you to do it. He is not, by the way, the one absolutely unforgivable sin is despair of God's grace, right? This goes through for centuries. God will forgive you most anything except despair, right? That will not be forgiven. And he knows the temptation, right, to say, I give up. Nothing, as a consequence of the poem we just read, right? And he's saying in this opening line, I'm not going to fall to this temptation. It is a temptation to despair, right? But I'm not going to feast. I love the word feast. Overeating, right? Too much. But it's a dead body. It's carrion comfort, right? It's not life. It will not give you life to become a vulture eating upon despair and surviving like that. Because it's giving up, okay? Not untwist, he says, slack they may be, these last strands of man in me. You like the image? It's like a rope, he says, that's just reaching its last. All I have to do is untwist the last, and then I'm gone, right? I'm going to keep that, I will not, yes, keep it taut, keep it together. He says, or most weary, cry, I can no more. I will not say that. I can, right? I'm not going to give up. But the temptation to give up is great. The need for rest, right? I can't fight it any longer. I'm tired. Let me go to sleep. He can say the one thing I can do is not choose despair, not choose nothingness. So that last line, the last word, I can. See, after a period, he wants you to make that pause. I can. What can you do, Gerard? Can something. Hope, wish day come, not choose not to be. He doesn't even say not choose to be. I mean, he doesn't say choose to be, but I can refuse to choose negation. Right? Sounds like suicide he's talking about, doesn't it? I refuse to make the choice of nothingness. I fight that. And then you get the but. He's speaking to God. Why have you done this to me? Right? But oh, thou terrible. Why wouldst thou rude on me thy ring world right foot? Ah. The image, you get it? Why did you put on me? The image is of subjugation in almost in a Near Eastern term. When a king would be conquered by an Assyrian, you'd be brought to the king, and you're down on your knees, and the king puts his head on you, right? When God puts his foot on the world, what does he do? Right? God is used to putting his foot on the world if he wants to, and he can wring that world the way you'd wring a, right? Just twist it into a wet rag, right? Why would you put your foot, which is a ring world foot after all, it's God's foot, why do you put your foot on me? It's not just, see, in Assyria, if a king did that, it wouldn't be, he wouldn't jump up and down on you. It's a formal image of subjugation. But what is God doing to him? He says, thy ring world right foot rock. What is God doing? He's not satisfied just for the subjugation isn't enough, right? Now, I believe when he became a priest, he had to literally prostrate himself, didn't he, before the archbishop. And you can see the image, right? He says, I knew I had to subjugate myself, but I didn't know you'd put your foot on my head, right? And start, right? How does this feel? Right? You can see him saying, why are you doing this? Isn't subjugation enough? It's not enough. Rude is the word, he says. I like the word rude. It's sort of crass, you know. I mean, would God do something rude? Not polite, right? It's not polite for the king to do that to a subjugated subject. But God does it. Yes, absolutely. Why do you do this, he says? Lay a lion limb against me. What is that, lay a lion limb against me? That takes you back to Samson, right?
Samson.
With his jawbone of an ass, you know, fighting with it. Why do you push the power of your strength, in a sense? The limb He is the lion, king of beasts, right? God, why do you do this? Go after me. That way. Scan with darksome, devouring eyes my bruised bones. There's the lion image continued, right? It's like you're in a hungry lion is looking at you, and what's he doing? He's looking.
What else can I do? To you?
Yes, right. The word is bruised, by the way, right?
Yes.
Where did he get those bruised bones? He's already been pilloried back and forth, right, by God. And now God's looking and say, okay, black and blue from head to foot. What can I do? I can eat you up if I want to, right? In other words, will you never give me peace from this pressure, right? Never give me peace, my bruised bones. And fan, oh, in turns of tempest, me heaped there, me frantic to avoid thee, and flee. What does he want to do? To get out of this, right? He wants to run. This should remind you of a very famous poem from the 19th century by Francis Thompson. You know the poem, The Hound of Heaven. I fled him down the days and down the way, down. Of course, what he's fleeing, of course, is Christ, who gets him in the end. He feels the same image. I suspect he knew that poem, right? Then the question, why? What is he running from, right? No, why is God doing this? And you get that marvelous image, that my chaff might fly. What is chaff?
That's the leavings of the grain.
Yes. And how do you get the chaff?
You blow it away.
But how do you get there first?
Rub it around.
You grind it, right? You grind it. God is separating the wheat from the chaff in me, right? It's needed. That my grain might lie sheer and clear. He's getting rid of the useless, right? God is doing that. Sheer and clear. Nay, in all that toil, that coil, since seems I kiss the rod. What does that refer to?
It's the rod that punished me.
No, I think it's, yes, partly that. But what's he going back to? Ordination, yes, when he became a priest. All that work, and all that pressure since seems, he says, right, it seems like ever since I said I will, you've been doing this to me. What a marriage to live in. Hand rather, my heart low. That is, I kiss the rod, hand rather. What's he saying?
That whipped me, that
Yeah, but turn it around. Why does it say hand rather? Right. Okay. He gets caught up in his own imagery. He says, to kiss the rod is to kiss the disciplinarian, right? The power. He says, ever since I became a priest and kissed the rod, oh, pardon me, the hand, right? Right. The hand which should pick you up. But he's thinking of God as a disciplinarian, as a burden who's attacked him. And he says, no, I know I kissed the bishop's ring and it wasn't a rod, but it felt like a rod and still feels like a rod. Hand rather, my heart, low, laugh, strength, stole joy, would laugh, cheer. Okay, now, ever since I got it, my heart wants to, right, get the joy of Christian service, right? Lap it up is a wonderful image like a calf. As though the church offers you a bowl and you go after it. But the question is, why? What was I going after, really? Right? Had I got the right relationship? He said, I would laugh, cheer. But cheer whom? Christ, God, or Gerard Manley Hopkins? Say, isn't Gerard Manley Hopkins a wonderful fellow? He became a priest, right? And guess who that is? That's me, right? I feel so good because I'm a priest. Now I'm saved, I'm going to go to heaven. God doesn't want it that way, right? It has to do with who you are. And he's seeing this. The poem is really an essay on what the interior of himself was when he became a priest. Because he told himself he was praising God. He was really praising Gerard. And God is showing him that he's going to get the praise. It's not going to come easy. Right? It's not going to come easy. Cheer whom though? The hero whose heaven handling flung me. Right? Was I cheering the Christ, the God who picked me up and threw me down, right? Foot trod me, or me that fought him. In a sense, he's saying that all these years I've been fighting Christ's submission to Christ and proud of it, right? Proud of it. I haven't crumbled yet, right? I'm strong. I will endure these burdens, right? I will stand up. He reminds me of Ahab, right? You do it to me, I'll do it to you, and I'll feel good about it. But God does not want that out of a priest, right? He doesn't want that ego. See, that ego that stands up and says, Gerard first, Christ second. He wants Christ first, Gerard second. Who, or me that fought him? Oh, which one? Is it each one? Probably is both, isn't it? Sure. Because he really did have joy in God. I mean, he's not saying he did not. But it's not pure, is it? It's not clean. That night, that year of now done darkness, I wretch, they wrestling with my God. What was he doing? What is the parenthetical?
How can I do that to my God?
Yes, that's the exclamation. Right? What was I doing? Isn't it a wonderful last line? I wretch. It reminds you also, is it of Jacob, who wrestles all night? Fights and fights and fights. Let's see. Let's try another one. I wake and feel the fell of dark. One of the oddities for me is that these are marvelous poems, and they always feel good after reading them. But they're tough. Here he is, waking up and finding himself alone. I wake and feel the fell of dark. Not day. What hours? Oh, what black hours we have spent this night. What sights you, heart, saw, ways you went, and more must in yet longer lights delay. With witness I speak this, but where I say hours, I mean years, I mean life. And my lament is cries countless, cries like dead letters sent to dearest him that lives, alas, away. I am gall, I am heartburn, God's most deep decree, bitter would have me taste. My taste was me. Bones built in me, blood brimmed the curse. Self-yeast of spirit, a dull dough sours. I see the lost are like this, and their scourge to be, as I am mine, their sweating selves. Worse. There's that same problem, you see. He spends his night in despair because he knows the power of his own ego. How hard it is for a proud man to bow down before God, right? The crucial word, the crucial line is self-yeast of spirit. A dull dough sours. You know what yeast is, right?
Right.
What is self-yeast of spirit? One's own communion.
Opinion of yourself.
It's yeast that makes the bread, right? And if the bread of you is the yeast of one's self, instead of Christ, instead of God, the dough that is the person that's created is a dull, soured person, right? And he knows that all of us, including himself, is so egocentric, right? I've created this. It's worse. The last lines are awful because when he's saying, I'm a priest, I'll go to heaven probably. What is it like to be lost and not to have salvation at all if the saved are the way I feel? A powerful image. I guess we don't have time to go on, but does that one come through all right? And its own?
They had a
I've got
terrible
it.
life, I think.
No, let's start with something good. Turn to, how much time? Turn to God's Grandeur, which is one of the most wonderful poems. On the first page. I wanted this to be the last one. I may still be able to squeeze in one or two, so let's make sure we get it in. This is about nature again. It's a positive one. The world is charged with the grandeur of God. It will flame out like shining from shook foil. It gathers to a greatness like the ooze of oil crushed. Why do men then now not wreck his rod? Generations have trod, and all is seared with trade, bleared, smeared with toil, and wears man's smudge and shares man's smell. The soil is bare now, nor can foot feel being shod. For all this, nature is never spent. There lives the dearest freshness deep down things, And though the last lights off the black west went, oh, morning at the brown brink eastward springs, because the Holy Ghost over the bent world broods with warm breast. Ah, bright wings. It's a lovely poem, isn't it? It isn't a poem of much praise for us. He says we've done everything we could to destroy it, right? We go through this world and we take nature apart, separate ourselves from it. And yet, in spite of everything we've done in this world, God is just waiting there, right? Just waiting at any moment to come back if we give him a chance. And the image of the Holy Ghost brooding like a mother hen, right, over this egg of a world, waiting for spring to come again is wonderful. Let's run through it, see how the images work. The world is charged with the grandeur of God. What is charge? It's like electricity, right? But it's like an electrical charge. My son likes to walk through the rug and build up static electricity. You can't see it, but when you get close enough, bam, right? Out it comes. The image here is that you don't see that grandeur at all times, but it flashes at us, doesn't it, as we go through life. It's there, waiting to be seen, or waiting to be felt. He says it will flame out like shining from shook foil. Can you guess that image?
Yeah.
You take foil, Reynolds wrap, and shake it in the sun, right? It's so fast, right? I mean, it's so quick, so limited, but it's still there. And it comes all of a sudden, bam, bam, and you say, what was that? Well, it's that inherent quality that he's getting at throughout the poem. What's inside the world, waiting to come. He says it gathers to a greatness like the ooze of oil crushed. He's probably talking here about olive oil being crushed out of the olives, right? The greatness comes so slowly that you don't see it, right? But it's there. It's implicit. And the pressure, we're interior again. You don't feel the pressure. You can't see the pressure. But God's greatness is just as interior, isn't it? It's on the way. It will come out like that. So two images. That's flashing and yet the intensity of the pressure of the crushing. So it's there.
The light hitting oil that covers.
No, I think he's talking about the greatness of the intensity of it, right? Yeah. It could be. I'm never confident about him. So he says, given that fact, right, that we have glimpses of it all the time, why do men then now not wreck his rod? There's the word rod again, you see. What is he saying? Why don't we respond? It's here every time we wake up. Why can't we see it? Instead, this is what happens. Generations have trod. This is what we've done to the world. The repetition of those words is so heavy, right? And we walk through and we stomp on all this nature and all of this possibility. And all is seared with trade, bleared, smeared. He loves these words. Seared, bleared, smeared, he says, with toil. And wears man's smudge and shares man's smell. And all of this is negative, as you can see, right? The soil is bare now. What's happened to the soil? It's bare. Why? It's used up, worn out. Get more to the image. Why? We've tramped all over it. Yeah, we've tramped all over it. We've destroyed it. We've killed it. It's all one big path, nothing. And to make it worse, nor can foot feel being trod, being shod. Why? Yeah. So we're so separated from the earth, we put on these great big grogans and wander and just kill everything on it. And you get this awful image of the earth denuded of all life, and us doing it and not even being aware of it, right? We don't even feel the earth anymore. And then that lovely shift. And for all this, in spite of all of that, nature is never spent. There lives the dearest freshness deep down things. Where is that? Inside, right? Underneath. We may think we're strong in our urge and need to destroy, but we can't touch it, right? That is that it's down there waiting to come out if we give it a chance. And though the last lights off the black west went. Here he's looking, he's giving us a chance to see. As we stand there seeing the sunset and say, that's it. Right? It's all over, we've destroyed it all. He says, turn around. Right? What do you have? Morning. It's on the way. I mean, dawn is here too at the same time. Oh, morning at the brown brink eastward springs. Why? Because the Holy Ghost over the bent world broods with warm breast and with protection, a sense of comfort, right? And eternal love is so great. I think we have time for one more. I like God's Grandeur a lot.
That also means that things look better in the morning.
I don't think so.
Well,
Well, they
it
do
sounds
actually.
simple,
Yeah.
but really,